Hello everyone, this is Mirko Guerrini and I welcome you to the Jazz Transcription Clinic, a monthly interviews podcast where we talk with accomplished jazz doctors about their lives, career and their personal secrets on the art of transcribing. If you want to improve at jazz, stay tuned and follow the Jazz Transcription Clinic on the socials for more content. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is being recorded. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Jazz Transcription Clinic podcast. Today's guest doctor in the clinic is possibly one of my favorite musicians I have ever had the pleasure to play with. And I met this beautiful man several years ago when I started visiting Melbourne for playing and for a little bit of teaching. And I fell in love immediately with his musicianship, his way of looking at music. And I have many stories that eventually I could tell in this episode if we have the occasion. He's a multi-award winner, one of the most acclaimed guitarists in Australia, and also internationally recognized. Guest doctor for today is the one and only Stephen Magnusson. Good day, Steve.
Hello, Mirko. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, has been a while since
it sure has.
We first met. But
God, it sure has, hasn't it? It's how many years has that been? 15 years or something?
Yeah, it's been something like that, but I wasn't living in Melbourne back then. But yeah, possibly you're right. The first time I came to Melbourne was 2005, so 16 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's been a while, but you haven't changed much. And
it's the lighting. It's the lighting. In the room. Yeah.
We both are dyeing our facial hair to look older.
Of course,
more mature,
of course,
intelligent, smart,
and having bits pulled out of the top of my head as well, just to kind of help the aging process.
Yeah, that makes us lose better musicians. At all. I have already introduced you, so if you do agree, I think we can just jump in.
For sure. It sounds wonderful.
Great. So this podcast, Steve, it's all about transcribing. And I remember, for example, that in one of our trips that we did together to Italy to take some Australian students to Prato, to the Monash Center in Prato, I remember finding you in your apartment, practicing some, should I say, Bach transcriptions?
Yes.
So, because this podcast is all about transcribing, I shoot the first question to you, which is, why do you transcribe?
I thought about this question. Being a musician is essentially like being a human being. When you are younger and your family that is around you, you often learn to brush your teeth by watching your parents, or how to hold a fork, and it's trial and error, and you miss and you make mistakes. And so you learn things by copying others. And, the journey of me as a musician, especially, essentially when I first started playing the guitar, I did learn to, understand notation, and then, as a young child, try and, translate that onto the instrument. But at the same time, even before that, what led me to the guitar, of course, was the music that was being played on the radio. And I remember when I first got the guitar, before I even had a lesson, I wanted to play something. So I had to work out what is that song? Like how can it sound like that song that was on the radio that I loved when I was a child? So I'd try and work it out. And I didn't even know how to even play the guitar then. I didn't even know what the notes were called. But I kind of went, if I played this interval, it sort of sounded like this tune. And to be honest with you, I don't even know how accurate I was at the time, but it gave me the impression that I was getting closer to copying that thing that was so magical and somewhat mystical, because I didn't know what the ingredients were. I didn't understand anything. All I knew was that this instrument was sort of this tool that could transport me to imitating what was on the record to the best of my abilities at an age of, whatever that 6 or something like that. So
Sure.
It was just that was the first kind of experience of kind of transcribing something by just trying to imitate one of the great pieces of music in my life, And to be honest with you, I can't even remember what they were, what these pieces. One of them I can, which was, like it was a rock and roll song from, the 70s,
Yep.
So that got me into this idea of transcribing essentially was the way of kind of feeling the same feeling that these performers were, kind of producing and was coming out of these speakers at my parents' place.
That's interesting. And there is a question that I have for you, and which reveals my deep ignorance when it comes to guitar. I play a few different instruments, but I definitely cannot produce anything even close to a nice sound on a guitar. And I always found it more difficult to imagine because, for example, on the saxophone or the piano, which are the instruments that I can play a bit, you have one note, one key, for each sound that you hear. While on the guitar, you can produce the same note in many different ways. Even though I understand now that the sound might differ a little bit depending on which strings you are playing that note, but was it something that when you started transcribing, was it clear or it was a bit confusing?
It is a bit confusing. The guitar is this kind of, like you just said, there are something like 4.2 fingering possibilities for every single note. Wow. There's some equation, So everything's going to get you into sort of paint you into a corner, but at the same time, the positive aspect of that is that people have this sort of unique sonic sound, touch, and also the phrasing possibilities. They really vary in terms of how you want to express that idea. Hence, someone playing the same phrase, and this happens, of course, on every instrument because everybody is different in their physical manifestation of their idea. But the guitar is so literal that this note here is there. So when it came to transcribing these things, especially when I got into the idea of transcription of improvised music, jazz, the entry points for a lot of that music after certainly maybe not the first few solos, but they were horn players. So I wasn't trying to mimic the guitar anymore. It was more about, it's a saxophone or it's a trumpet or it's a drum, it's a snare drum or something. So then my imagination had to come into play in terms of, it's about then from, playing the guitar to emulate the phrasing of, Miles Davis. Okay, well, where's the articulation? How is he sliding into that note? You know, all of the sort of the nuances that then the fingerings of the guitar can help me sort of navigate to the best of my ability at that time, because some of these things were quite primitive from myself in terms of working out how I could best obtain that phrasing, because that was the thing that was so, it was just so apparent that when I heard those great solos that I still listen to now, is that of course it's the notes, you're copying the notes and the rhythm, but there's so much more. There's all the glue that holds it together, which is the articulation and the dynamics and the length of note and all of those sort of nuances, plus what else is happening in the rest of the band, you know, which is another can of worms, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, you know, then it goes into that other realm. But at that stage, I was probably just fixated on that instrument, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was a real thing of trying to, well, how do I navigate that? And, you know, at first it was just, okay, I'm just trying to cop the rhythm and the notes, and then it's like, okay, how do I slur that like that instrument? And, you know, because of the great guitar players that I did listen to at the same time, they were inspirational in terms of, and my teachers that helped guide me to sort of go, well, you know, if you want to articulate it in a more of a vocal way, maybe you have to start exploring not articulating every single note. I mean, it's really logical, but when you're young, you sort of go, oh, yeah, okay. And, you know, although this was through the sort of the jazz kind of prism, the rock guitar players that I loved, especially the heavy rock guitar players that were using extended techniques, they sort of influenced that as well, because they sound more horn-like to me now as I get older, because they look at so much in terms of slurring and articulate and versus just hitting every single note. You know, some do, but a lot of them slur and fret and slide and create this sort of vocal-like quality. You know.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to me that you said at first I wanted to get rhythm and the notes, and you said it in a way that it looked very natural. But I want to point out, you know, for all the listeners, that rhythm is the first thing that you need to get. It's the most difficult. Most of the times, the rhythm, you know, you can spend like 20 minutes on like how to put those 7 notes inside 3/4 of a beat. And you start thinking, okay, if I write this, and then you feel, oh, it's not accurate. Yes, the rhythm is the first way to express ourselves, and the pitch is almost secondary. You know, it's first the rhythm, and then how you play, and then it comes the pitch. But sometimes you only figure out later, oh, it's not a G sharp, it's a G natural, but you got the essence, which is in the rhythm and in how you play. So, sorry, I had to do a little bit of a
that's so vital, because, you know, we all know that, you know, as you go further down this pathway of being a interactive musician, that the rhythmic component in music, which is a pulse, we're dealing with time all of the time, and it's all about negotiating that. I mean, if it doesn't, you know, everyone talks about this. If it doesn't feel good, it's probably not going to be good, you know. So that was the thing that you notice when you listen to Frank Sinatra or somebody that's, especially vocalists, because they have this ability to push and pull that was so kind of, like I said, mysterious. Like, how the hell is that working out? And you know, some of the rhythmic structures, like you just mentioned, they defy kind of, basic subdivisions that you spend time when you're first beginning looking at, just how you divide a beat up in all the sort of systematic ways. And then you hear someone like that just flies across the bar and you go, wow, how does that land? And those things are just, like you said, it's a rhythmic music that we play, and we are constantly negotiating that, So totally agree.
This makes me thinking of an interview to Oliver Nelson that I read a while ago. I think he gave this interview to Downbeat once he came back from a trip to Africa. He went to Africa for education purposes. He went to give some workshops, and then he came back with some strong statements. He said, we think that jazz music comes from Africa, but actually, that's not completely true. That's, a mixture of so many things. And he gives the example of trying to teach some kids the form of a blues. And he said it was quite frustrating to see that the blues, which is, commonly and generally associated with African heritage, they were not able to understand. But the concept here is that they didn't get the concept of 1 bar in 4/4 because they don't use that. So you see that rhythm, as you said, is quite mysterious. It can be only written with a big compromise, in place.
Yes.
You can't do it perfectly, and when it comes to be too perfect, it's not nice anymore. It doesn't sound nice anymore. So there is that little, like vague line there in the rhythm that makes and gives the magic to the music.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I imagine that sometimes, time permitting, you are still transcribing some music. What do you expect to bring home with transcriptions? What is the outcome that you are looking for?
Well, it depends on the situation. Sometimes it is purely for just that seed that was planted when I'm just looking over there. I can see my first guitar is on the wall over there, which just reminded me of that thing that happens when you're younger and where you are asking, what is that? What's that? What's that? And I'm still so intrigued when you hear, whether it's Herbie Hancock play something, on a piece of music, the chart says A7 sharp 5 or something, and he plays a voicing, and you like, what is that? And you have to kind of, so you work out the notes, and then you realize that it's so far away from the symbol that's on the page. All he's doing is reacting to the moment, what happened before, where it's going. But this thing is just, and how it's connecting with the band, the rhythm and all of that. But the material, just kind of that childlike quality of sort of saying, what is that? Like, wow. Because, music is still, for me, such an unknown. I love the unknown. So for what I get out of it is, firstly, the buzz. Like, it's the hit of like, what is that? Oh my, and it could be transcribing, some, 3 instruments that are just playing some sort of harmony off an arrangement of 3 horns, or it could be, a bar of, or 3 beats of Sostakovic string quartet that you just go, wow, how those that viola is sitting there and the cello, and how do they work together. I mean, you get that buzz, or it could be just the way that somebody's actually just sitting behind the beat. You mentioned Oliver Nelson,
Yeah.
one of the big solos transcribing for me was, of course, Stolen Moments solo.
Yeah.
Eric Dolphy's flute solo, he's just caned it, and then suddenly there's 3 notes that he enters with that, that just rock you. That's the one. And then he repeats it again, and then he goes off on this the way he develops that thematic thing, and that becomes pretty much the basis of the whole solo is those 3 notes, and how that glues the band together. So for me, it's not necessarily even an outcome. It's more of a buzz to say, like we just happened then. We talked about a solo that informed me so much about narrative storytelling, how somebody can set up a structure and say, I'm going to deal with this. We've just had Eric Dolphy tear the thing to pieces, and now I'm going to just sit still with this incredible 3 notes with an amazing sound, by the way, and the band's just cooking behind him, and he generates this incredible journey on a minor blues, and kind of makes the whole thing sort of still, and so for me, that's the outcome. The outcome is the fact that it kind of got me thinking so much about not necessarily what he played, but the fact that he told this story, and that story set me up on, well, how can I generate narrative? How can I create that sort of storytelling? And I struggle even with describing that with words, because that's the thing that is so still the unknown for me in terms of how the individual takes material and develops it. So transcribing is kind of like that. It's like grabbing something, looking at the bigger picture of it, or sometimes it's just looking at the little fragment and how that person developed the fragment or didn't develop it, and how I might take that fragment and then go take it away and manipulate it, and it's such a, so there's no real, it's funny because outcome is so subjective almost. Like I don't even know what happens sometimes with it, this is when it's not a job. It's kind of like just my journey,
You sound like a very curious kid, that wants to look inside the toy and look at the magic trick, that there is. And sometimes you open the toy and you can't work out, how that little mechanism inside does the trick. But at least,
but I was that sort of kid. I was that sort of kid.
Yeah. But at least
I used to pull the clock apart. I used to pull clocks apart, and I was really into, getting batteries and having little globes and making, electricity current, and saying, how does that work? And I didn't understand, but I used to try and mess around with it a lot when I was a little kid. So I was always kind of going, well, how does that work? And I think transcription does, it can give you the buzz, and you can look at the bigger journey, which is transcribing the complete solo, or it might be 8 bars, or it might be one chorus of a form of a show type tune, or, and there have been several times that's occurred,
This is kind of responding to my next question, which is how do you choose the solos that you are going to transcribe? So you are saying that you are intrigued by something that you listen to, and without having a specific plan, you just grab what you need to grab. Am I right?
Sometimes. And then there have been times where, I can think of Keith Jarrett's solo on Stella by Starlight, Standards Live, that solo was, I learnt it probably through the way that most people, when they listen to something over and over again, is that they sing it.
Yeah.
So I can put that on now and I'll sing along with it. But then I went, okay, I'm going to transcribe the first two choruses.
Yeah.
And by the time, and this is when I was 16 or something. So by the time I got to the end of the second chorus, he starts playing more information and I got a little bit lost. But that first two choruses are just, I can still play them. Well, I haven't played it for years, so I don't know if I could, but I could put the record on and it was such a way of kind of going, well, there's that, and then sometimes it is a complete solo from the beginning to the end, like some Jim Hall solos or Miles Davis's When Lights Are Low. That was a solo that I transcribed from the beginning to the end because I love the journey. I love the way that he dances on the time, and so sometimes they're complete, and other times they're just, okay, what is going on with that 8-bar break? That musician plays that you're just going, what is happening? How did they do that? Or I was looking at a transcription the other day. Of Herbie Hancock on his "There Is No Greater Love" off 4 and More, where he gets into that chorus where he's just playing triplets for almost the whole chorus, and it's just magical. So, it varies. I don't have any. It's what I choose is often because the music is blowing me away.
Yeah.
Like I've mentioned all these musicians now because they're all kind of my heroes, and those particular records like 4 and More and Standards Live and Saxophone Colossus, or the Miles Davis albums from 57 all the way through.
Yeah.
Like there's albums where you just would listen to something over and over again and you can kind of sing it. You can sing it and you just love it. It's almost like you live with it, don't you? The bridge, Sonny Rollins, you like just listen to that record so much so that's what they're the tunes and the takes that I would actually hang out with, because not because I want to be that, I just want to work it out. Like I said before, what's that? What's that?
Yeah. And you remind me that sometimes I pick a solo because it, in my memory, it tells a story about me, because maybe through that track, I was able to understand something, or it was a turning point of some extent. I remember the first time it was a drummer, a friend of mine, and he used to give me vinyls, to lend me vinyls to listen to. And one day he gave me Fish Out of Water, Charles Lloyd. And I didn't know who Charles Lloyd was. And I remember I put on, this record, and I was blown away. So, and in that moment, I discovered, a different way to think at the tenor saxophone sound.
Yeah.
And I started doing some experiments, because I started, copying him. I wanted to understand what was going on. And so I discovered that by moving my upper teeth much forward on the mouthpiece, I could get that fluty sound that he got, especially on the high register. So it's part of your personality, of your story, of who you are. And sometimes it's just one track, that does that. There is a moment in your life where, whoa, and then you spend like the next 6 months, doing some work that is related to that one track.
Yeah. And, I was just thinking, getting high. I'll never forget buying Still Live Talking, the Pat Metheny group. Yep. It was 1986. I wasn't feeling great. Girlfriend problems when I was a teenager. Got the record, and I'll never forget that third wind guitar break, 8-bar solo break that he plays, and it was life-changing. It was just like, I don't know what is happening, and so I had to transcribe it. And Ben Robertson, a great bass player, you know Ben, we used to talk about that solo. So then we both transcribed it, and we'd compare notes. Oh, did you get it? And then we'd try and play it. We'd both try and play it. And we still talk about it now. We still get together, and since then, now you can get on the internet and I can see how accurate or probably how wrong I was at the time with. But like you said, it was the process of doing it was so informative, and it becomes you, not to sound like them, just to go down this rabbit hole of possibilities of musical form and musical language that's so unfamiliar. So you're just sort of grasping it, and Eric Dolphy solos were huge for me too, because it was a bit of a what the hell is going on the first time I ever heard him. Yep. I just didn't know I didn't even understand what was he doing, and so then transcribing a few lines and solos, just helped me go, wow, he's playing up at the top of partials of the chord. He's sort of playing all the extensions. Yeah. Wow. It was a real wow moment.
I should adopt a new motto for my podcast, like, tell me the transcriptions you made and I tell you who you are.
They do inform your life. They because to transcribe something, and I'm sure you've talked about this so much with different musicians over this podcast that you're doing, is that there's writing it out, there's notating it, then there's learning it, then there's singing it, then there's just listening to the thing hundreds of times, if not even more than that. Because, people that I've found that when I've talked to, being a teacher now, if someone transcribes it just off the record and they listen to it and they slow it down and then they write it out and then that's it, and then they put it over there, I'm like, yeah, that's great. You can study that, and there's a lot in that. But my transcriptions were more about, like you said, they informed me of who I was because I was just so in love with them, and they kind of resonated even emotionally, made me cry basically.
And it's like if we have planned this, but that was exactly my next questions that are going a little bit into the procedure and the practical sides of transcribing. So do you write it down when you transcribe, or do you write it down after you memorized, or you write down bar by bar? So can I ask you, what is the methodology that you use?
It's so interesting you said that, because you went through a few different approaches, and I've been through all of them. Like there's no, there was a period where, the manuscript paper would come out and you'd write it down. And I had to have it. I'm back in the day of the cassette player, and I got really good at just rewinding the cassette. I've still got the cassette players over there, and it was just like, back again. What's that note? What's that note? What's that note? What's that rhythm? And, so that was stage one, and then I would try and play it. Or I would, at the same time I was listening to it away from the notated thing, so I could sing it as well. Of course, if it was really a lot of information, maybe I couldn't really sing it, but I could phrase it with my mouth and try and sing along with it, So there's that as well, because for me, like I said, that's the thing I want. I want to learn it through osmosis just as much as I want to intellectually grasp it with notation. So I'd write it out, and then I'd also it was really important for me because maybe I was negotiating at the time, trying to crack certain harmonic codes that I was like, well, what is the relationship of that material to the form that they're playing with? And if it was a harmonic form, then, well, what's going on? So I definitely sit down and go, I need to analyze this now because what's happening with this chromaticism or something, an upper structure sitting on the top, up above the chord, why? So having it written out really helped me kind of digest that analytical side. But now, as I'm getting older, sometimes I don't write them out. Sometimes I just play them. I'll just try and play them, So I think it's changed a little bit over the years, but there's still be times when I'll go, I'm going to write that out because I just really want to have that on the page, because it's, and also as a guitar player, as you know, we're not the greatest readers in the world. So it certainly helped me establish my reading skills a little bit more and develop my reading skills a little bit more because I had to, negotiate the rhythmic aspects and put it on the page, So it's kind of, like I said, it's probably more about singing it now and playing it and orally digesting it than it is about writing it out, which it used to be much more about years ago.
As I used to say also to my students, writing it down, it's very good if you want to understand the theory behind it, but you won't get the feeling of it. That is only coming through the years. And a couple of months ago, a student worked on a transcription that I gave him. It was like a homework, right? And I gave a solo by Ella Fitzgerald in a mellow tone. Not too difficult, but, and he's a good student. And once he got it, and he got basically the notes and the rhythm, let me say, like 90% accurate. He, at the lesson, he said, okay, can you give me another solo? And I said, no, you are not done with this one. You have just completed the preparation. Now we are going to study the solo. You have just, finished to setting up the ingredients. Now we are going to cook, the meal.
Yeah.
So this is an important point that sometimes students miss, that to get the notes and the rhythm is just the preparation, is, preparing the ingredient. But then, a recipe doesn't depend on exclusively on how much salt you put in it. It's, also how you combine and understand the combination of the flavors, and sometimes you need to add some salt into a cake. And you might not understand this, or you might not recognize when you eat it, but it's much, much better. It comes out much, much better. So that's important. Definitely important.
Yeah, definitely. And the being, engaged in, like I said, the love of it, I think is the overriding factor for me now, is that I was listening to Michael Brecker 2 days ago, the album Pilgrimage, with his final album, and it's got all of the most amazing musicians on it. It's Jack and Herbie and there's, and Pat Metheny and they're all going for it and they're having a great time. And I was blown away again. I haven't heard the record maybe for a few months, maybe 6 months. But it put it on, and I was outside working, and I had it on, and I just was sort of, what I'm getting at is that the fan in me, the musical fan that I am of all of this high level improvising that's going on, was just like, I had to come in, and I sort of got a little bit upset by it because firstly, Michael Brecker's not on the planet anymore, and secondly, it's like, it blew me away, and so I need the transcription brings me closer to that, just as much as, the material, we these days, because of the internet, which is great, you can grab a transcription straight off the net and have it there.
Yeah.
But my thing is much more about, the hang with it, the long hang that I'm going to listen to, that anagram tune, or something off that record, that the way that they all negotiate that is just frightening, actually. Jack DeJohnette, I mean, transcribe the drums on that. Oh my God, wow. I'm a huge fan, and the transcription is a way for me to get closer to that. And that's that's what I get out of it always.
Yeah.
And you're right. It is just the ingredients just to write the notes out,
I just finished recently, a couple of weeks ago, and it's online now. I have a live version of the podcast where I transcribe in real time, also to show, the listeners how I do it, which is not the way to do it, but it's one way to do it. And I have completed the transcription of The Cost of Living on Mike Brecker's first album as
the
a
first
soloist.
album.
And I transcribed the melody and then Charlie Haden solo and then Michael Brecker's solo. And those two solos, as we said before, are part of my childhood. I used to listen, especially the Charlie Haden solo. It was like I could figure Charlie Haden playing a tree. I could feel like the live wood that he was playing and all those melodic lines that he play on such a beautiful tune always drove me nuts. But I only transcribed recently because I never transcribed it before. I did a transcription of Michael Brecker, which is, of course, incredible. But coming after that solo, it would have been a great inspiration, of course, even for the musicians that are playing.
And what a record, for me. That record was a bit of a game changer because for me it was like 8081, the album 8081, the second version of it.
Yeah.
It was almost the same band without Dewey Redman and with Kenny Kirkland.
Yeah.
And the way that they enter that opening track is just like, whoa, here we go, So
and in fact, there is a correspondence between the fact that the first and the last album had, Jack DeJohnette and Pat Metheny on it, and unfortunately Charlie Haden was already,
he was already he was alive still.
Yeah,
but
he was alive,
but he wasn't. He was having problem with the tinnitus, and he wasn't at that point in his life like he was back in the 80s when they were doing those records,
And Pilgrimage has also like two of the best pianists in the world. Is to make a joke, it's like if he was auditioning for a pianist, it's Herbie Hancock and Brad Mehldau in the same recording.
Yeah, so like again, it's notice how when we're talking about music, we're fans. We just. What I thought was when I was listening to that record was that this type of those gentlemen on that record, that particular record, there are so many other records that I love, but that one is like that generation, especially, Jack DeJohnette, of playing jazz and Herbie, those two, because I've seen them play live and how they are this generation of that almost last generation that's alive of this jazz
of
world.
The real ones.
Yes, exactly. Of this particular time that's like, what do you do? What do you say to that? And it was just the way they negotiate language is just it's so exciting. Like I watch Jack DeJohnette and Herbie almost every 3 days, just because they make me feel so good about being on this planet.
Yeah.
So I've worked out a lot of things from them, cracking codes about how they flow. Their flow is just incredible. Not to mention this, their skill level is just on this other realm. Listeners too. Like, whoa,
Yeah,
amazing.
we could spend probably another couple of hours talking about that.
I know, just about Jack DeJohnette. I know, easily.
Listen, Steve, I know we are both of the generations where we knew how to use this not only to write music, but also to rewind tapes, because you didn't want to worn out, the tape. You want to last the tape for longer. But during these days, do you use a software now when you transcribe, or you still use your ears?
I use my ears, and if I have to, I'm big at the moment of using, when I'm working, like I write things down. I use manuscript, but I have Sibelius up there, and I use Sibelius to often finish it.
Yeah.
When it's whether it's a composition or whether it's a transcription, it's compiled there.
Yeah.
Because I lose these and they get tatty and they get destroyed and I spill a cup of tea on them. So, yeah. But everything kind of goes in this because they're sketches. It's a sketchbook, and then I have
and it comes with you.
Yeah, and it's easy to have. It's easy just to have it in your bag, and it's also certainly during this period of time of being home alone a lot. Not alone, but alone in this room, is that it's just a great way of the immediacy of grabbing an idea and manipulating it, negotiating it, taking it. Like if it's a transcription or an idea from someone else, I can write it down. And so I don't use that for transcribing or composing generally.
Yeah.
I have used it for composition sometimes, but I don't like starting there. I don't like starting on it. It doesn't gel with me, and I find that I get a little bit, I'm not connected to it as much. Yeah. But it's great for later on,
Yeah, I know that the most popular softwares or apps for transcribing are those ones that can slow down the music, or where you can create loops on the music. Do you ever had the need to slow down stuff? And the reason why I'm asking is also, because people might be interested in knowing how you might become as great as you are. But for example, for a horn player to slow down to even like 60% speed makes us understanding a lot, for example, the tonguing and the breathing, which are two critical factors, to be able to reproduce the shape of a line. You need to breathe in the exact moment, and you need to use your tongue in the exact way. So in that way, I can hear exactly which notes are tongued and by how much. So it's no more for me, it was in the past, but no more for me what note is that, but more how he played that note.
Yeah. I totally understand, and that's something that I've used it for that purpose probably about 14 years ago or something, maybe even around that time when that program Transcribe came out.
Yep.
I downloaded that on this computer maybe not this computer, the computer before that. So I would use it for, like I mentioned, Herbie Hancock voicings. Like there's this tune called The Night You Were Born off Tony Williams' album, and I wanted to work out what the chord voicing was.
Yep.
And it was so kind of I couldn't work it out, every single note out was flying by. So I kind of went, well, I'll slow it down to work out how that thing sits with the rhythm section, actually. It was that thing, not even how it sat with the melody, because the melody was quite simple at that point in the tune. But so, yeah, it is great for grabbing something and slowing it down to look at articulation, phrasing, breath, like you said, all of those nuances that give you this sort of insight into that person's, whether it was like you mentioned Ella Fitzgerald or Billie Holiday, how they kind of, that note ends there and how that phrase is, we're talking about the tiniest little bits of time that is the glue that actually holds it together, you know. So it's beautiful for that, I think that, like you said about the note, once you get the notes, like we said right at the beginning of this conversation, it's like, the notes are the notes. It's like a bit like the Omni book, the Charlie Parker Omni book. I've always shied away from that book because whenever I played those, it never sounded like Charlie Parker. You've got to put on the record. Listen to his phrasing. His phrasing's the most intense, it's actually so complex, all of that stuff. And you only get that by sitting down and getting into, like you mentioned, all of those little tiny elements of reproduction of sound, The notes are the notes.
And it's like, how many times it happens that we have misunderstandings with people because of a text message. Because if you take away the sound from a word, from a phrase, there is a big room for, misunderstanding. And in music it's the same. If you look at the Charlie Parker Omnibook, that's like a text message from Charlie Parker. You don't get the inflection, you don't get the feeling, you don't get the anger or the love or the passion or the relax, that originally was on that solo.
Or the band. Yeah, I mean, there's all that. There's, like I was saying, that other thing that you get when you listen to music is, well, how is that other musician responding or driving that idea that influences that person to say that thing there? I mean, Miles Davis is the master of listening to his albums and how the band, especially that 60s band, everything is happening because of someone else. I mean, you can't deny that, Tony Williams is going to throw this thing at somebody and they're going to go, yes, take that, whether it's Wayne Shorter or, Ron Carter, like or Herbie, it's like, whoa, who's got the ball, basically, So I think that's another thing that I did with transcribing, especially someone like Ornette Coleman, was that what's Charlie Haden doing down the bottom? How's he responding or how's Ornette responding to him, There's a beautiful duet album that they did together. I can't remember the name of it. And it's duets by Charlie Haden, and some of them were with Ornette and I think Hampton Hawes and Alice Coltrane. And the duets, it's beautiful, just these two voices. And one can't exist without the other. So transcribing for me was, if I looked at Ron Carter playing with Jim Hall, I had to kind of work out what the two of them were doing because it's this beautiful conversation, It's incredible.
Absolutely. And how do you practice the solos that you transcribe, or the lines, the beats that you transcribe? Do you have a routine?
Not at this stage, but I have gone through and, I have tried different methods. I remember years ago, I can't remember who suggested this. Saxophone player, I can't think of the person's name now. The great saxophone player, American, played with Elvin Jones and Miles. what's his name from the 70s?
Dave Liebman.
Dave Liebman, and he was talking about transcribing, and years ago he said, well, once you learn a transcription, turn it off, turn the sound down and keep playing and see if you can sit with the track still, and then come back in and see where you are, and to get an idea of, okay, the bigger structure of time and phrasing and all that. So I've tried those things. Then I've tried just playing along with it. Then I've tried just to take it out of context and play it on its own. Then I've tried to reimagine it by putting my own accompaniment with it, just to have a look at it. Then I've also, if it's not a lot of notes, sometimes then if it's, say, those beautiful mild solos where there are a lot of space, you can accompany yourself with them too. So you can use them compositionally. So they become sort of how you can comp almost with them. You know
that.
So they can really manifest in so many different ways.
Yeah. I have studied with Dave Liebman, and he did it to me live in person. He did play this transcription, and then he turned off the volume, and then he was doing, the recording engineering.
And he's sort of just saying, get how well, like you mentioned before, with writing the notes out is almost like, it's just the alphabet. Then it's like, okay, well, where's the poetry? Where's all of that? Once you want to get into the whole self-expression of the thing, because I mean, the other side of it is like that. This, like I've said to you before, it's the magic of the music is the reason why you're here. So you got to get to that as
Absolutely.
well, which is, or else you're not there. You miss it. For me, I'm not there, and I'm still blown away listening to John Coltrane live at the Village Vanguard. I mean, it still just makes me go, whoa,
And what you are saying in relation to the transcription process, that you want to learn it and memorize because you want to get the feeling of it, finally makes me pulling out the story that one time I was playing with you. I think it was at the Old Bennett's Lane, and I like to observe people, to observe musicians at work, because I can learn a lot even by observing their manners and how they do things. And I think I wasn't probably still a resident here, but it was one gig where I brought in some of my original music. So you sat down and you said before, that guitar players are not the best readers, but that's only in jokes, in my opinion and in my experience. And so I started observing you. We were playing a tune of mine, I can't remember which one, which I couldn't play from memory because it was like freshly written. I haven't learned it. I wasn't too confident to play it from memory, so I was reading it. And you just, and I tried to blow one chorus at the sound check, just to, we were running the heads. I blew one chorus, and then I expected you wanted to try to play over one chorus. And you said, yeah, that's fine. I said, oh, okay. And I thought firstly you didn't like the tune, which could have been, a possibility, a chance. And then we played the gig, and I remember clearly that you were reading the chart while I was playing. I play the head, I play the first solo. You're reading, comping beautifully as you do. And then you start your solo and your head goes down and your eyes go off like this, closed eye. And you played one of your, beautiful, incredible solos. And I think I told you something at the end. I told you that I was really jealous. And I probably asked you how you did it. And you gave me this answer that, you only need a bit of time to play the melody, to hear the melody few times, and then while comping on someone else solo, you get the feeling of the tune, and then when you solo, you just you got enough, that you can use to solo. And I was really blown away by that. I think
thank you.
that's a great approach to improvise music. Get the feeling as soon as you can.
Yeah, there's something about, I remember that particular gig because sometimes when someone puts something in front of me, there's two ways of playing music for me in a band setting. There's the, and they're both great. There's the rehearsing it and you get it down, and especially if it's got a lot of things that you've got to get, so you've got to work out how you're going to play it. And then there's the other thing where you, like those sort of gigs where we hadn't played much as a band, new tunes, and they're thrown in front of you, and I'm up for, I don't know what's going to happen. So I just want to listen. I've got to find a relationship with this structure that's in front of me, and then I'm going to react to it, and I'm going to try and hold the form as well, which is ultimate importance. So then it's like, and you juggle those, and I remember that gig where during the sound check, I don't want to play everything because I'm like, I just trying to work out, okay, that's going to go there, that's working like this, and then it's like, okay, now I've got something, and now I know how it's going to unfold the song, so I think it's going to be okay. Whereas, because I've kind of mapped something, with you've got the same thing. You've got your material that you've been working on, transcriptions in the past, all of that stuff sort of, it's in the pot roast of your brain. And then it's just like, okay, well, it's with a band that's responsive. I think Tony Floyd was playing that gig with us, wasn't he? I think he was, and play with Tony. He's gonna throw things at you, and I know how he's gonna throw some ideas at me, so I'm gonna react to that. And then it's like, okay, now it's showtime, So it's such a thing of, and then the great thing about music is, as you know, is that if we did that 5 nights in a row, it's gonna how things change, and they don't always have that immediacy once you've done it 10 times.
Genuinity.
Then it goes through another process, and it's like that amazing thing. And sometimes it does lull a bit, and then it finds something new, or you have to find something new within it, or maybe something happens, So there's all these variables about music, and I loved that night for me in particular because I can remember it because that it was so fresh, that freshness thing where you are hanging on, you're just hanging on. You're on your edge of your seat and you're ready to, and anything could happen to it at any time. And you just you're on for the ride, And I feel that when I listen to these transcriptions that we're talking about, pretty much all of them, because they're some of them are from live concerts where that's what happened. And even though that Michael Brecker record and Pilgrimage, I know that those guys only do 2 takes generally. They don't 2 or 3 max, because once you've done it, you've done it. And they're prepared though, they're ready for it. So then it's just like, well, let's go, and I find that that's the most amazing thing about when you're transcribing someone is that you're kind of getting this fresh thing of, when we listen to Charlie Parker and we hear that now's the time solo that everyone can sing, it's like he did that on the fly that day. That's what it was. And he never did it like that ever again. Which is that's the most amazing thing about it. Or Sonny Rollins on St. Thomas solo. I mean, It's like he never played those motives, that opening motive like that probably ever again. He would have played bits of it, but it wouldn't have come out the same way. And that's that's the most beautiful thing about being engaged in improvised music,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
transcription kind of really kind of solidifies that for me.
Yeah, in another episode of the podcast, we came out to the conclusion that there is like an electric circuit that goes around between what you transcribe, what gets part of your personal vocabulary, and then what comes out when you play. So it's like working in circles, right? And we came to the conclusion that when we play a jazz improvised thing, not necessarily on chords, but even if we play a free improvisation, it's basically transcribing what we hear in our head. So again, the process of transcribing is involved in everything that we do. From the moment that we listen and we try to understand what's going on, that's when transcription starts, basically.
Yeah. It's all inclusive, and I think that you are this interactive mode. You're in this interactive mode with people on the fly, and you've got this thing that you've been hanging out with, and it can be, it's great to look at, all of the structures of music and all of that, but the transcription is almost like somebody's given you a poem. And if you're looking at this beautiful poetic kind of nature of music, that when we talk about, Ella Fitzgerald singing on a standard or anybody great, is that you're getting this poetry on that night, and you're trying to, you learn so much about, not necessarily through words like me discussing it with you, you just learn it because it's the dance. It's like a dance.
Yeah.
It's like it's this beautiful poetry like that I need to kind of that's part of who I am. And you, like you said, every solo that you listen to, whether it's or transcribe, whether for me it's Alan Holdsworth or Charlie Haden is a classic one of just beautiful poetry. It's this poetic state, this unraveling of this idea, that Ornette does it too, but Ornette's like a songbird. He's like, it's this beautiful, majestic bird speaking, doing its thing, like the magpies that we have outside here. The same sort of thing. It's just meant to be like that, So you learn so much from it. And I, talking to you about it now, it's not something that I even think about, but too often anymore. But it all makes perfect sense, I'm a fan of music, and these people have helped elevate the experience for me,
And this leads us to the conclusion of the episode, but also reminds me that the first album that we recorded together here in Australia is called Acqua Cheta. And Acqua Cheta is a little creek in Tuscany, which was mentioned also by Dante Alighieri, who wrote the comedy, and which this year is the celebration of 700 years from his death. So here we are closing another circle. You are talking about poets, we are talking about music, poets, Tuscany, Florence, Dante, comedy. And so now that we have reached a very high, cultural point, I drop down to the floor and I shoot the last question, which is the silliest question that you may ask to a musician like you, which is, which transcribed solo is your favorite?
Oh, wow.
Do you have a favorite? I mean, I know that you probably have hundreds of them, but if you have to mention just one right now on the spot, go.
Oh, you've really got me now. Like it's I have to really think about this because there's so many that are there. Really, I'd probably have to say though that yeah, it would probably be out. It's kind of, I can't. It would either be, like I mentioned before, St. Thomas, like Sonny Rollins, because that was a real game changer for me. That changed how I even heard music. Just was like, I can't believe, and I had to work it out. You know, it was especially fragments of rhythms and how he kind of kept the thing going. That set the ball for me in terms of how does someone tell a story? You know, like I said, the storytelling thing. And the other one, I mean, there's so many more, but there's a solo Story from a Stranger, Pat Metheny. Story from a Stranger, Pat Metheny. That was off an album called Rejoicing. And the way that he, again, opens this with the most simplest kind of melodic fragment, and how the solo does this and it just keeps building to the point where first time I ever heard it, I cried. Like I just lost it. So I had to write it out. I had to work it out. I was just like, I can't go on if I can't hang with this and work out the chord progression and understand this journey. So those two solos were, I mean, there's so many more. It's such a hard one because I mentioned Keith Jarrett. He was another one too, but those two were very big in that beginning period of being 16, kind of going, whoa, you know.
But it's just, you know, to finish with a
little
bit of lightness.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I mean, you want to have those peak experiences, and that's what those solos did for me.
Yeah.
They heighten the experience, you know.
That's great. And of course, all the references will be in the description of the podcast or under the YouTube video. Also, there will be some links to Steve's music, where to buy it, which is a very good thing that you can do to yourself. And also to his website and all information. So if you are in Australia, and it happened that the same night that you decide to go out, Steve Magnusson is playing, don't miss him. If you are not in Australia, get on a plane and come to listen to Steve Magnusson playing, because it's worth the ticket and the trip. So thank you so much, Steve, for your time.
Thank you, Mirko.
And for your insight over the transcription process. And what else? I say hello to you.
I just like to say thank you, Mirko, for doing this. And it's a really wonderful way for musicians to connect, and in this day and this time period and what's going on the planet, and just to talk about our love of this incredible art form, you know.
Exactly. And I feel like has been only 5 minutes that we have spent together, but it has been a bit more. And so we can continue. Maybe in the future we will do a second chapter with you, a recap, or maybe we can do a transcription together. We will work out something. And
wonderful.
So goodbye to everyone. Thanks for listening, and goodbye to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.